In today's video, I will cover the president with arguably the most complicated and controversial legacy in American history. That is, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson was born on March 15, 1767, in Lancaster, South Carolina, to Andrew Jackson Sr. and Elizabeth Jackson, who were both Irish immigrants. Only shortly after his birth, his father died. He was a rowdy child, often getting into fights and cussing frequently, which went against his mother's hopes that he would become a Presbyterian minister. At the young age of 13, Andrew Jackson, alongside his brothers Hugh Jackson and Robert Jackson, joined the side of the Patriots in the American War for Independence. Hugh died of a heat stroke in 1779. 2 years later, Andrew and Robert were captured. This is where a British redcoat famously slashed Andrew Jackson with a sword because he didn't polish the soldier's shoes. The two of them contracted smallpox before Elizabeth got them out through prisoner exchange. Unfortunately, Robert Jackson died of the illness. Elizabeth left to nurse injured soldiers, where she died of cholera, making Andrew Jackson an orphan at 14. After the war, Jackson lived a rather sporadic life before becoming a school teacher and studying law. At the young age of 17, Jackson became an attorney. He was well known for his rather extreme personality, where he famously won a duel with a man who mocked his wife. Andrew Jackson also built a mansion called the Hermitage, located in Nashville, Tennessee. Andrew Jackson was the first representative in Congress to be from Tennessee, later serving in the Senate before he became a major general in the War of 1812. During the War of 1812, Andrew Jackson won at the Battle of New Orleans, where he became a national hero and earned the nickname Old Hickory for his toughness. In 1824, Andrew Jackson chose to run for president. He ran against prominent congressmen and former members of Monroe's cabinet, and in the end, he won most of the electoral and popular vote. However, he did not win the majority of votes, that being over 50%, and as a result, the election went to the House of Representatives. Henry Clay dropped his campaign and endorsed John Quincy Adams, who won the election and made Henry Clay the Secretary of State. Andrew Jackson and his supporters were infuriated and spent the next 4 years continuing to rally behind Jackson. In 1828, Old Hickory finally became the President of the United States. In his very first message to Congress, he suggested eliminating the Electoral College and further democratization of the federal government. Interestingly enough, the Jackson presidency centered more around him than specific issues. The Democratic Party was formed in favor of Andrew Jackson and his beliefs, whilst the National Republican, later called the Whig Party, was formed in opposition. As a result, this era is commonly known as the Jacksonian Era. Many Whigs, especially Henry Clay, viewed Andrew Jackson as a tyrant, with people who opposed him nicknaming him King Andrew. One reason was because he, unlike previous presidents, acted more as a figure independent of Congress, vetoing more bills based on his political beliefs than whether or not it was constitutional. One aspect of the Jackson administration which is incredibly famous is Andrew Jackson's hatred for the National Bank. He viewed it as an undemocratic institution, which gave the full authority of the economy into the hands of a few wealthy elites. Alongside that, he believed that it went against the Constitution. Andrew Jackson eventually ended all federal aid to the bank, and when Congress sent a bill to his desk which would recharter the bank, he vetoed it. In 1832, Jackson won the presidency for his second term. However, he was faced with a great challenge. After a tariff on trade was passed, which Southerners called the Tariff of Abominations, South Carolina opted to nullify the law. Old Hickory sent armed forces to South Carolina. The vice president, John Calhoun, who is from South Carolina and a believer in states' rights, went against Jackson, who threatened to hang Calhoun. In the end, Clay made a compromise and tensions cooled, but John Calhoun had left the White House and was later replaced by Martin Van Buren. Shortly before Jackson left office, he passed the Indian Removal Act. This act would send the 5 civilized tribes out of their current holdings into Indian Territory, which would later be called Oklahoma. After the case of Worcester versus Georgia, where Georgia's government decided to force the Cherokee out, the Supreme Court ruled that the government of Georgia could not force the Cherokee to Oklahoma. However, it still happened as Andrew Jackson sided with Georgia, declaring the case stillborn. He is also well known for a quote where he says, John Marshall has made his decision. Let him enforce it. That quote probably was never actually said, but it still shows that Jackson acted more as a figure on his own and did not really he saw himself more as above the rest of the government, but that's why that quote was kind of fabricated. Once Jackson left office, the Trail of Tears began, which forced the 5 civilized tribes out to Oklahoma. After leaving office, Andrew Jackson's vice president, Martin Van Buren, became president. Jackson is now remembered as a man with a highly controversial legacy. Some view him as a man of the people who stood up for what was right. Others see him as a genocidal tyrant who disrupted the government. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.